Have you ever considered that what people call love is often nothing more than a contract signed out of fear? Fear of silence. Fear of nights that echo with nothing but your own breath. Fear of realizing that the greatest stranger in your life might be yourself. What if relationships are not always about connection, but sometimes about distraction, a carefully decorated escape from the abyss within? Carl Jung warned us that the soul cannot be negotiated. You can trade comfort, you can trade company, you can even trade your dreams in exchange for never being alone. But the price is always the same. You lose the essence of who you are. And when the mask of routine finally falls, when the body ages and the roles dissolve, you will face the only question that truly matters. Did you ever live as yourself, or did you just play the role others handed you? Staying single in a world that worships coupling is an act of rebellion. It's not about rejecting love, but about refusing to abandon your own path for a borrowed one. And that is why sometimes solitude is not emptiness. It is the purest form of freedom. There's a voice inside your head that whispers lies in the middle of the night. It tells you that being alone means being broken, that solitude equals failure, that your worth depends on someone else choosing you. This voice has been programmed by years of movies, songs, and well-meaning friends who believe that happiness comes in pairs. Jung discovered something shocking about this inner voice. It's not actually yours. It belongs to what he called the collective unconscious, a shared pool of fears and beliefs that society dumps into our minds from birth. The terror of being alone isn't natural, it's learned. And like all learned behaviors, it can be unlearned. Think about it. When did you first learn that being single was something to fix? Was it when you watched your first romantic comedy? When your grandmother asked about your love life at family dinner? When your friends started pairing off and you felt left behind? These moments planted seeds of fear that grew into massive trees of anxiety, blocking your view of your own completeness. The truth is, this fear serves someone else's agenda, not yours. A world full of desperate people makes for great consumers. Industries thrive on your insecurity. Dating apps profit from your loneliness. Wedding planners build fortunes on your fear of dying alone. The message is clear: you're incomplete without another person. But here's what they don't want you to know. The most creative periods in human history came from people who spent significant time alone. The greatest discoveries, the most beautiful art, the deepest wisdom, all emerged from minds that had the courage to sit with themselves without distraction. When you're constantly seeking someone else's approval, your energy scatters in 1,000 directions. You become a chameleon, changing colors to match what you think others want. You lose touch with your own desires, your own dreams, your own voice. The fear of being alone becomes a prison that keeps you from becoming who you're meant to be. Jung called this process shadow work, the uncomfortable but necessary job of examining the dark corners of your psyche. The fear of solitude is often masking deeper fears: fear of inadequacy, fear of facing your own thoughts, fear of discovering that maybe you're not as interesting as you pretend to be. But what if those fears are wrong? What if the version of yourself that emerges from periods of solitude is more fascinating than any role you've ever played for someone else? What if your own company is actually the most valuable gift you can give yourself? The secret fear isn't really about being alone. It's about being real. When there's no audience, no one to perform for, no relationship to maintain, you're left with the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. And that can be terrifying if you've spent your whole life running from yourself. Breaking free from this trap requires a radical shift in perspective. Instead of seeing solitude as punishment, start seeing it as privilege. Instead of viewing your single status as a problem to solve, start treating it as a gift to unwrap. The fear loses its power the moment you stop feeding it with your attention and start feeding your curiosity about who you really are underneath all the masks. Somewhere along the way, humanity bought into one of the most dangerous myths ever created: that you are incomplete until someone else completes you. This idea, romantic as it sounds, is actually a recipe for disaster that keeps millions of people trapped in cycles of dependency and disappointment. The myth tells us we're half of an orange, wandering the world searching for our missing piece. It sounds poetic until you realize what it's actually saying: that you're broken, defective, and insufficient as you are. That your wholeness depends on finding another broken person to stick together with, hoping two halves will somehow make a perfect whole. Jung saw through this illusion immediately. He understood that healthy relationships can only exist between two complete individuals, not two needy halves desperately clinging to each other. When you believe you need someone else to be whole, you don't enter relationships. You enter dependencies. This myth creates a twisted form of love that's really about taking, not giving. You don't love the other person for who they are. You love them for what they do for you, how they make you feel, how they fill the void you believe exists inside you. The moment they stop playing that role, the love disappears. Real love, the kind Jung wrote about, can only flow from fullness, not from emptiness. When you're complete within yourself, you love someone not because you need them, but because you choose them. You appreciate their uniqueness instead of trying to mold them into your missing piece. You give from abundance rather than taking from desperation. The half-orange trap also sets up impossible expectations. If someone is supposed to complete you, then they're responsible for your happiness, your sense of purpose, your emotional well-being. That's not love. That's emotional slavery. No human being can carry that kind of responsibility without eventually cracking under the pressure. This myth destroys individuality. When you see yourself as half a person, you start sacrificing your own interests, dreams, and identity to maintain the illusion of completion. You become a supporting character in your own life story, existing only to serve the relationship rather than living as a full human being who happens to be in a relationship. The most tragic part is how this mindset makes people settle for mediocre connections. When you believe you're incomplete without someone, anyone will do. You lower your standards, ignore red flags, and stay in relationships that drain your life force because you're terrified of returning to your incomplete state. Breaking free from this trap starts with a simple but revolutionary idea. You are already whole. You always have been. Every cell in your body works in perfect harmony without needing external validation. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, your mind creates, all without requiring someone else's permission or presence. Wholeness isn't something you achieve by finding the right person. It's something you discover by spending time with yourself, exploring your own depths, developing your own interests, and learning to enjoy your own company. It's about becoming so fascinated with your own growth and potential that you don't need anyone else to make life interesting. When you embrace your completeness, something magical happens. You stop attracting people who want to use you to fill their emptiness, and you start attracting people who are also complete. Relationships become about sharing your fullness rather than trying to fill your void. Love becomes an overflow of abundance rather than a desperate attempt to fix what was never broken in the first place. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Most people run from silence like it's poison. They fill every quiet moment with noise, distractions, and other people's voices because they're terrified of what they might discover in the stillness. But what if that silence is exactly where your greatest power lies hidden? Jung spent years studying what happens to the human mind when it's left alone with itself. He discovered that solitude isn't empty space. It's fertile ground where your truest self can finally grow without interference. Every genius, every artist, every innovator throughout history has had one thing in common. They knew how to be alone with their thoughts and transform that aloneness into something extraordinary. Think about your own mind for a moment. When was the last time you sat in complete silence without reaching for your phone, turning on music, or calling someone? When did you last allow yourself to be bored enough that your imagination had to kick in? Most people can't remember because they've trained themselves to fear the very thing that could set them free. The magic happens in those uncomfortable moments when you have nowhere to hide from yourself. Your mind starts to wander, and in that wandering it makes connections it never made before. Solutions to problems you've been struggling with suddenly appear. Creative ideas bubble up from depths you didn't know existed. The voice of your authentic self, usually drowned out by the noise of other people's opinions, finally gets a chance to speak. But here's the part that most people miss. This process only works if you stop treating solitude like a temporary inconvenience. You have to embrace it, welcome it, even seek it out deliberately. You have to train yourself to sit with discomfort instead of immediately reaching for a distraction. When you develop this skill, something incredible happens to your relationships with others. Instead of desperately needing their company to feel okay, you genuinely enjoy their presence because you're sharing from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. People can sense this difference immediately. They're drawn to individuals who are comfortable in their own skin because that comfort is magnetic. Your ability to be alone also makes you incredibly valuable to others. When everyone else is panicking, needing constant reassurance and external validation, you remain steady. You become the calm in other people's storms, not because you're pretending to be strong, but because you've actually developed inner strength through spending time with yourself. This superpower extends into every area of your life. At work, you become the person who can think independently, who doesn't need constant approval, who can work on projects without needing a team to hold your hand. In friendships, you become the person others turn to for genuine advice, because they know you're not just telling them what they want to hear. You've developed the wisdom that comes from honest self-reflection. The transformation isn't always comfortable. There will be moments when you sit with yourself and don't like what you find. You might discover that some of your beliefs are borrowed rather than earned, that some of your dreams aren't actually yours, that you've been living according to other people's scripts. This is where the real work begins. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. It requires courage to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, to question the assumptions you've never examined, to sit with feelings you've been numbing with constant activity and other people's presence. But once you learn to transform loneliness from an enemy into an ally, you develop a kind of inner freedom that most people never experience. You stop being controlled by the fear of being alone because you've discovered that your own company is actually quite fascinating. You stop settling for relationships and situations that don't serve you because you're not desperate to avoid solitude. The ultimate irony is that when you become comfortable being alone, you're never really lonely. You've developed a relationship with the most important person in your life, yourself. And that relationship colors every other relationship you'll ever have, making them deeper, more authentic, and more satisfying than anything you could have imagined when you were running from your own company. There's a strange law of the universe that most people discover too late. The moment you stop desperately searching for something, it often appears. But this isn't about magical thinking or wishful hoping. It's about a fundamental shift in your energy that changes everything about how you move through the world. When you're actively hunting for a relationship, you broadcast desperation in ways you don't even realize. Your body language changes. Your conversations become interviews instead of genuine exchanges. You evaluate every person you meet as a potential solution to your loneliness, rather than appreciating them as complete human beings. This energy is repelling, not attracting. Jung understood that desperation creates a vicious cycle. The more you need something, the more likely you are to make poor choices to get it. You ignore red flags, lower your standards, and compromise your values because you're operating from scarcity rather than abundance. You become so focused on filling the void that you can't see clearly enough to recognize whether what you're reaching for is actually good for you. But something magical happens when you genuinely stop looking. Your energy shifts from taking to giving, from needing to being, from hunting to simply existing as your authentic self. This shift is like flipping a switch. Suddenly you become magnetic in a way you never were when you were trying so hard. When you're not looking, you're present. You actually listen to what people are saying, instead of analyzing whether they might be the one. You enjoy conversations for their own sake, instead of treating them as auditions. You laugh more freely, share more honestly, and connect more deeply because you're not performing for an outcome. This presence is incredibly attractive to others. Think about the people you've been most drawn to in your life. Chances are they weren't desperately seeking your approval or trying to impress you. They were simply being themselves, comfortable in their own skin, interesting because they were interested in life rather than focused on what they could get from you. When you stop looking, you also stop compromising your own growth and interests for the possibility of meeting someone. You pursue hobbies that genuinely fascinate you, rather than activities you think might help you meet people. You travel to places that call to your soul, rather than destinations that might increase your dating opportunities. You become more yourself, and a more authentic you is always more attractive than a manufactured version designed to appeal to others. The paradox deepens when you realize that not looking doesn't mean not caring about connection. It means caring more about the quality of connection than the mere existence of it. When you're not desperate for any relationship, you can be selective about the relationships you do pursue. You can wait for genuine compatibility rather than settling for warm bodies to fill the silence. This selectivity leads to better outcomes in every area of life. When you're not frantically seeking romantic connection, you often deepen your friendships, improve your family relationships, and develop a stronger connection with yourself. These relationships become more fulfilling because they're based on genuine enjoyment rather than desperate need. People often worry that not looking means becoming passive or giving up on love entirely, but that's not what happens at all. Instead of desperately seeking, you start attracting. Instead of chasing, you start choosing. Instead of settling, you start selecting based on actual compatibility rather than availability. The shift from looking to being also frees up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy that you can redirect toward your own growth and interests. When you're not constantly scanning every room for potential partners, analyzing every interaction for romantic possibility, or recovering from disappointing dates, you have space to focus on becoming the kind of person you'd want to be with. This focus on self-development creates a beautiful cycle. The more you develop yourself, the more interesting you become. The more interesting you become, the more naturally you attract interesting people. The more you attract rather than chase, the better your options become. The better your options, the more selective you can afford to be. The ultimate freedom comes when you realize that your happiness doesn't depend on finding someone else. When you reach that point of genuine contentment with your own life, relationships become bonus features rather than necessities. And bonus features, by definition, are meant to enhance something that's already good rather than fix something that's broken. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to effortlessly attract others into their lives, while others struggle and chase, but always come up empty? There's an invisible energy at work here that most people never understand, and it has nothing to do with looks, money, or charm. It's something far more powerful and mysterious. Jung called this invisible force authenticity, but it goes deeper than just being yourself. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your inner world that it radiates outward without any effort on your part. When you're genuinely comfortable with who you are, when you've done the hard work of facing your shadows and embracing your light, you become magnetic in a way that can't be faked or manufactured. This force operates on frequencies that most people can't consciously detect, but everyone can feel. Think about walking into a room and immediately sensing someone's energy before they even speak. Some people make you feel drained just by being near them, while others make you feel more alive simply by existing in the same space. The difference isn't random, it's the result of their internal relationship with themselves. When you stop desperately needing approval from others, something shifts in your energy field. You're no longer broadcasting neediness, which is one of the most repelling forces in human interaction. Instead, you start broadcasting contentment, curiosity, and genuine interest in the world around you. This shift is like switching from a flickering fluorescent light to warm, steady sunlight. People naturally want to move toward your warmth. The invisible force works because it's based on truth rather than pretense. When you're trying to attract someone by being what you think they want, you're essentially lying with your entire being. Your body language, your words, your energy, everything about you is slightly off because you're performing instead of being. People sense this dishonesty even when they can't name it, and it makes them uncomfortable. But when you've spent time alone, when you've gotten to know yourself deeply, when you've accepted both your strengths and your flaws, you move through the world with a different kind of confidence. You're not confident because you think you're perfect. You're confident because you're real. And realness, authentic humanness, is incredibly rare and therefore incredibly attractive. This force also works because it's selective. When you're not desperate for just any connection, you naturally attract people who appreciate your specific qualities rather than people who are just looking for anyone to fill a void. You start drawing in individuals who resonate with your actual personality instead of the mask you might wear when you're trying too hard. The magic deepens when you realize that this invisible force doesn't just attract romantic partners, it transforms all your relationships. Friends become deeper and more meaningful because they're connecting with the real you. Professional opportunities increase because people trust and respect authenticity. Family relationships improve because you're no longer trying to be who they want you to be. One of the most powerful aspects of this force is that it works even when you're not trying to attract anyone at all. In fact, it works better when you're simply living your life, pursuing your interests, and being genuinely engaged with whatever you're doing. People are drawn to passion, to purpose, to individuals who seem to have found something worth living for beyond just finding someone to live with. The invisible force is also protective. When you're operating from this authentic space, you naturally repel people who would drain your energy or take advantage of your kindness. It's as if you develop an internal radar that can detect dishonesty, manipulation, or desperation in others. You stop attracting people who need fixing and start attracting people who are also doing their own inner work. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice of being alone with yourself, honest self-reflection, and the courage to show up as who you really are rather than who you think others want you to be. It means accepting that some people won't like the real you and being okay with that because you'd rather have genuine connections with a few than superficial connections with many. The ultimate power of this invisible force is that it makes relationships optional rather than necessary. When you can attract the right people simply by being yourself, when you have deep friendships and meaningful connections flowing naturally into your life, romantic relationships become something you choose rather than something you need. And choosing from a place of abundance always leads to better decisions than choosing from a place of desperation. There's a brutal truth that no one wants to acknowledge. Relationships built on desperation are doomed before they even begin. They might last for months or even years, but they're constructed on such shaky foundations that collapse is inevitable. Understanding why this happens can save you from years of heartache and wasted energy. Desperation creates relationships based on need rather than desire, on fear rather than love, on scarcity rather than abundance. When you enter a relationship because you can't stand being alone, you're not choosing that specific person. You're choosing anyone who's willing to fill the void. This isn't love. It's using another human being as an emotional crutch. The problems start immediately, even if you don't notice them at first. When you're desperate, you ignore red flags that would be obvious to someone in a healthier mindset. You overlook incompatibilities, excuse bad behavior, and rationalize situations that your intuition knows are wrong. You're so relieved to not be alone that you'll accept almost anything rather than return to solitude. This dynamic creates a twisted form of gratitude where you feel thankful to your partner simply for existing in your life, regardless of how they treat you. You become afraid to set boundaries, express your needs, or stand up for yourself because you're terrified they'll leave and you'll be alone again. This fear turns you into a smaller version of yourself, someone who apologizes for taking up space in their own relationship. Desperate relationships also attract the wrong kind of people. Healthy, confident individuals can sense desperation from a mile away, and it makes them uncomfortable. They want partners who choose them freely, not people who would cling to anyone willing to stay. So desperate energy tends to attract other desperate people. Or worse, it attracts predators who enjoy having power over someone who needs them more than they need to be needed. The most destructive aspect of desperate relationships is how they prevent real intimacy from developing. True closeness requires two people who are secure enough in themselves to be vulnerable, honest, and authentic. But when you're operating from desperation, you're constantly performing, trying to be whatever you think will keep the other person from leaving. You never let them see the real you because you're convinced the real you isn't worth loving. This performance is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. You can only pretend to be someone else for so long before the mask starts slipping. When your authentic self inevitably emerges, your partner feels deceived, not necessarily by conscious lies, but by the fact that they fell in love with the character you were playing rather than the person you actually are. Desperate relationships also lack the healthy tension that keeps love alive. When you're grateful for any attention, when you never challenge or disagree, when you sacrifice your own interests to keep the peace, the relationship becomes boring and predictable. Your partner starts taking you for granted because you've taught them that you'll accept whatever they offer without question. The cycle of desperation creates its own momentum. The more you compromise yourself to keep someone, the less attractive you become to them. The less attractive you become, the more desperate you feel. The more desperate you feel, the more you're willing to compromise. It's a downward spiral that can only end in the relationship's destruction or your complete loss of self. Even when desperate relationships don't end in dramatic breakups, they often settle into patterns of quiet misery. Both people know something is missing, but they're too afraid to address it because addressing it might mean losing what little security they have. They stay together not out of love, but out of mutual fear of being alone. The tragedy is that desperate relationships prevent you from ever experiencing what real love actually feels like. When you've never been in a relationship where you're chosen for who you truly are, where you feel safe being vulnerable, Where conflict leads to deeper understanding rather than fear of abandonment, you don't realize what you're missing. Breaking free from the pattern of desperate relationships requires developing a different relationship with solitude. You have to become comfortable enough with your own company that being alone feels like a choice rather than a punishment. You have to build a life that's so fulfilling on its own that relationships become enhancements rather than necessities. This doesn't mean becoming cold or closed off to connection. It means learning to distinguish between healthy desire for companionship and desperate need for validation. It means developing enough self-respect that you won't accept poor treatment just to avoid being alone. It means trusting that the right person will appreciate your authenticity rather than requiring you to perform for their approval. There's a small group of people who seem to possess an almost supernatural ability. They're never truly lonely, even when they're completely alone. They don't just tolerate solitude, they genuinely enjoy it. They have rich inner lives, meaningful friendships, and when they do enter romantic relationships, those relationships are extraordinary. What's their secret? The secret isn't that these people are naturally more social or extroverted. Many of them actually prefer smaller gatherings or quiet nights at home. The secret isn't that they have more friends or busier social calendars. Some of them have only a handful of close relationships. The real secret is that they've developed what Jung called a relationship with the self. They've become genuinely interested in their own minds, their own growth, and their own inner world. This relationship with themselves makes them immune to loneliness because they're never truly alone. They carry within them a constant companion, their own consciousness, their own creativity, their own capacity for wonder and reflection. When other people complain about being bored or restless when alone, these individuals use solitude as an opportunity to explore ideas, work on projects, or simply enjoy the luxury of uninterrupted thought. They've discovered something that most people never learn. Your relationship with yourself sets the template for every other relationship in your life. If you find yourself boring, others probably will too. If you don't enjoy your own company, why would anyone else? But if you've cultivated a rich inner life, if you've developed interests that fascinate you, if you've learned to entertain yourself with your own thoughts and dreams, you become inherently more interesting to others as well. These people also understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from others and from yourself. Solitude is choosing to spend time alone because you value that time. Loneliness feels empty and painful. Solitude feels full and peaceful. The difference isn't in the external situation. It's in your internal relationship with yourself. One of their most powerful secrets is that they've learned to be their own best friend. They treat themselves with the same kindness, patience, and encouragement they would offer to someone they care about deeply. When they make mistakes, they practice self-compassion instead of self-criticism. When they're struggling, they comfort themselves instead of immediately seeking external validation. This self-friendship creates an internal stability that doesn't depend on other people's moods or availability. They've also mastered the art of meaningful solitary activities. While others reach for distractions when they're alone, these individuals engage in activities that nourish their souls. They read books that challenge their thinking, practice skills that bring them joy, create art that expresses their inner world, or simply sit quietly and observe their own thoughts without judgment. They've turned solitude into a form of self-care rather than something to endure. Another crucial element is that they've developed a strong sense of purpose that doesn't depend on romantic relationships. They have work they care about, causes they believe in, creative projects that excite them, or personal growth goals that motivate them. This sense of purpose gives their lives meaning and direction whether they're in a relationship or not. They're not waiting for someone else to make their lives worth living. They're already living lives worth sharing. These individuals also tend to have excellent boundaries. They don't say yes to social invitations out of fear of missing out or desperation for connection. They choose their social interactions based on genuine interest and mutual respect. This selectivity means that their relationships, though perhaps fewer in number, are much deeper and more satisfying than the superficial connections that many people settle for. Perhaps most importantly, they've learned that being alone and being lonely are completely different experiences. Being alone is a circumstance. You're physically by yourself. Being lonely is an emotional state that can happen even when you're surrounded by people. Many people in relationships are profoundly lonely because they've never learned to connect with themselves or others in authentic ways. The ultimate secret is that these people have discovered something profound. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. When that relationship is strong, healthy, and loving, it radiates outward and transforms every other relationship in your life. You stop looking for someone to complete you because you're already complete. You stop trying to fill a void because you've realized there was never a void to begin with, only untapped potential waiting to be explored. The journey to becoming irresistibly complete isn't about perfection, it's about wholeness. It's about integrating all the scattered pieces of yourself into a coherent, authentic person who doesn't need external validation to feel worthy of love and respect. This transformation is perhaps the most important work you'll ever do, and it starts with a simple but radical decision to treat yourself as if you matter. The first step is developing what Jung called conscious awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without immediately judging them. Most people live their entire lives on autopilot, reacting to circumstances without ever examining why they react the way they do. Becoming complete requires waking up to your own patterns, understanding your triggers, and choosing your responses rather than being controlled by unconscious reactions. Start by spending time each day in quiet reflection. This doesn't have to be formal meditation. It can be as simple as sitting with your morning coffee without distractions and asking yourself how you're really feeling. Notice what thoughts arise without trying to change them. Observe your emotions without immediately trying to fix them. This practice of self-observation is like developing an internal muscle that gets stronger with use. Next, begin the process of reclaiming your interests and desires. Many people have spent so much time trying to please others or fit in that they've lost touch with what they actually enjoy. Make a list of activities that made you happy as a child before you learned to worry about what others might think. Try new things, not because they might help you meet people, but because they might help you meet yourself. Develop your own opinions about things that matter to you. Read books that challenge your thinking, explore philosophies that intrigue you, form positions on issues that affect your life. Too many people go through life parroting others' opinions because they've never taken the time to figure out what they actually believe. Having your own well-thought-out perspectives makes you infinitely more interesting and attractive than someone who just agrees with whatever the person they're talking to happens to think. Learn to enjoy activities alone that most people think require company. Go to movies by yourself, eat at restaurants alone, take trips without companions. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about discovering that your own company can be genuinely enjoyable. When you're comfortable doing things alone, you stop being dependent on others for your entertainment and start being someone others want to spend time with because you're genuinely content. Practice saying no to things that don't align with your values or interests, even when saying no might disappoint others. Every time you say yes to something you don't want to do, you're training yourself to ignore your own feelings and priorities. Every time you say no to protect your time and energy, you're reinforcing your own worth and building self-respect. Develop skills that bring you joy, regardless of whether they're practical or likely to impress others. Learn to play an instrument, Study a language, master a craft, explore a science that fascinates you. The goal isn't to become an expert. It's to engage your mind and creativity in ways that make you feel more alive. People are drawn to individuals who are passionate about something, anything, because passion is magnetic. Work on healing old wounds and traumas that keep you stuck in patterns of neediness or desperation. This might mean therapy, it might mean forgiveness work, or it might mean simply acknowledging that past hurts don't have to define your present choices. You can't become complete while carrying around unprocessed pain that makes you seek healing through other people. Create a life that you genuinely love, not one that looks good on social media or meets other people's expectations of success. This might mean living in a smaller apartment that you can afford without stress, working a job that pays less but fulfills you more, or choosing friendships based on genuine connection rather than social status. When you love your actual life, rather than performing a version of life you think others will approve of, you become irresistibly authentic. Most importantly, learn to give yourself the love, encouragement, and acceptance you've been seeking from others. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend. Celebrate your successes, comfort yourself during difficulties, and speak to yourself with respect and compassion. When you become your own source of validation, you're no longer dependent on others for emotional survival. The irony of becoming complete is that the moment you no longer need someone else to make you whole, you become the kind of person others want to be around. Completeness is attractive because it's rare. Most people are walking around with pieces of themselves missing, looking for others to fill the gaps. When you show up as a whole person, living authentically, comfortable in your own skin, and genuinely enjoying your life, you become magnetic in a way that can't be manufactured or faked. This completeness doesn't make you closed off to love. It makes you open to real love, the kind that enhances rather than completes, the kind that comes from choice rather than need, the kind that Jung knew was the only love worth having. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of our time isn't that people die alone. It's that so many live their entire lives afraid of their own company, running from the very solitude that could transform them into the extraordinary beings they were meant to become. We've been sold a lie wrapped in romantic poetry, that we are incomplete, that we are halves searching for our missing pieces, that our worth depends on someone else's willingness to choose us. But Jung saw through this illusion and revealed a truth that could revolutionize your existence. You were born whole, you remain whole, and the moment you stop apologizing for your completeness and start celebrating it, you become irresistibly magnetic to the very love you thought you needed to chase. The paradox is breathtaking. Only when you no longer need love do you become worthy of the deepest, most authentic love possible. Your solitude isn't a problem to solve. It's a gift to unwrap, a power to harness, and a doorway to becoming the person you were always meant to be before the world convinced you that you were broken.